Yeah, selling your timber. What you need to know, this is really kind of timely right now because I'm involved with the timber sale over at our Scout Reservation by Lake of the Ozarks. So kind of going through these very same steps. Question I always get, why are you selling your timber? Why sell my timber? You can look at it, there could be several reasons. There can be one, just capturing tree mortality. We have a lot of woodland owners in Missouri, at least, that if it's green, it's good. And so they haven't really done any harvesting. And so they're beginning to lose those trees. And you can bank that in long-term carbon storage. That might be one reason. But it also, too, thinning that woodland garden, helping maintain the forest growth and the resiliency, particularly as we have our changing climate, our wild swings we are getting, whether it's from drought to flood or hot to cold. These trees, you want to keep them healthy, just like we want to be healthy. So if we do get a disease or something, we can withstand it. We want to regenerate the forest. Sometimes it's just time to regenerate, or you might have a neglected woodlot that has been high graded where the best has been taken out, and it's time to just kind of reset the clock. Uh, Also maintaining and improving wildlife habitat and diversity. And that's kind of a misnomer too. People think that, well, it's got to be one or the other. And as you all, for a lot of folks do know that as we increase the food factory, if you will, the nuts and the acorns, we're also then putting wood on the trunk of the tree. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. We want to, yes, definitely capture the economic value. Usually the biological maturity of our trees coincides for the most part when it's the best time as far as in their life to capture that economics. We want to also supply a sustainable flow of forest products. We can't have mills without logs going in, and if we don't supply them, then when the need really does come, that they wouldn't be around. And like we say, and usually the loggers and the sawmills, they're the backbone of our rural economy, definitely over here in Missouri, some 600 primary processors taking something round, making square. So it's really tied close. And like I said before, capturing that carbon, putting it into a long-term, flooring cabinet, as opposed to letting that tree just fall in the woods and then releasing the carbon that way. It's just a way to bank. But landowners, I get a lot of questions. They'll have misgivings. And so, what are some of the common concerns that I'm sure Chris has even heard through his career? One can be, will my woods look bad? And while they might look rough that first year or two, they do settle down. It's just that first year that it can look a little rough, but we can talk about how you can work with your logger if that's one of your concerns. We also have, will it cause erosion? If the best management practices are followed, no, we get most of our sediment movement. It's going to be on our trails, our skid trails, and our landings, and that'll usually happen, in the first year. But then as things green up, if you seed the landings, seed the skid trails, you can keep that to a minimum and adhering to the best management practices, whether they're in Illinois or Missouri in your state. How do I get a fair price? That's something that folks want to make sure that they're not being taken, if you will. It's kind of like what you're going to find out today going in, selling your timbers like going into a poker game, but you know what your hand is. And so that's what we're hoping to do is help you know what you've got. Will it hurt the wildlife? Again, no, we can usually have, because we have different parts of our forest in different stages of succession. And some of our wildlife like that early successional habitat that's usually prevalent after a sale. Will my woods be ruined? Well, hopefully not. If you go through these steps and you're using a reputable logger. And this is when I get to, I just don't understand the process. I'll get calls, I'll say, give me a list of loggers or give me a list of sawmills, and I'll do it from there. And then I say, well, you really kind of understand the process. So again, you know what's happening. So what we're going to do here is going to have basically 8 steps, actually 8 plus, and you'll see what that plus is here in a minute, but that you'll work with a professional forester. That's going to be the key, the underlying theme, as you're going to see. You're going to understand the process, but we're not training you to go out and do this all by yourself. It's going to be by using that professional forester, understanding the process, then you're going to ensure the sustainability of your forest or woodland, and you're also going to maximize profitability. But, okay, first things first, this wasn't a problem 10, 15 years ago, but if you've got invasive plants in your woodland, so that image there on the left, that's our good friend bush honeysuckle. And so if when we're thinning the garden, we're giving trees more, our trees that are left rather in the forest to grow. Well, that's going to, light is our limiting factor, but then we open it up. And then if we have any invasives, they're just going to explode. And that's what you have over here in a sale that was done. And again, the bush honeysuckle, if it wasn't prevalent, it's really going to take off, after you have that harvest. And it's going to be harder to deal with it after the harvest as it would be before. So really, you want to control these weed species if you have them prior to harvesting. Again, it's going to be much easier to control before. As you can imagine, getting around in here is much easier than over the residue of a harvest. Because again, the light that you're giving to everything else, you're giving it to these aggressive invasives, and they're just going to dominate. So what you'll want to do best is really kind of do this about 3 to 4 years before, if you can think that far ahead, because you can get them out and monitor and manage, take those out, whether it's calorie pair, they're going left to right, or in the top one there, tree of heaven, and or good buddy bush honeysuckle, autumn olive, winter creepers coming in, and then in North Missouri too. I'm sure you've got it in Illinois, garlic mustard. These are just maybe the top 6, but there are probably a whole plethora of other ones. But the main thing is to control your weeds prior to harvesting if you can. So, but really, step one, the first one here in these 8, it's going to be know what you have to sell. You want to be certain of your boundary lines. We're going to look at that, selecting the trees that are going to be harvested, determining the timber volumes, and potentially to identify potential wood products. So this is, again, what your forester will help you do. Inspecting the boundaries, making sure you have boundaries identified, if maybe not by a fence line, at least that you've got you or your neighbor to have purple paint, the purple paint law, to identify where your boundaries are. And usually foresters will mark the sale about, a tree length off of the boundary line, just so they don't get into issues with neighbors. The other thing is too, and note it, it helps when if you don't know your neighbors, as you're walking the lines or even before, let your neighbors know about your plans. Letting them know is that they see these logs laying off on a landing or off the side of a road, that this is legitimate, particularly if you got walnut, these aren't thieves going out there taking it. And that they have your approval, that this harvest is part of the process. Might also then help avoiding a scene when the work actually starts. So again, communication is the key to everything. Selecting the trees to harvest. So this might be a typical woodland. I know, at least in Missouri, you look in there and you go, how do you know which trees to take out? This one over here on the right, that's over in Pioneer Forest. Now there's actually been, you can see a stump there. They've actually done a selective harvest, but this is where, again, forester coming in and, you're leaving your nice tree there on the left, but that one is kind of crooked and sweeping. Again, you're not wanting to high grade, you're wanting to get out the worst ones to leave your best ones to maximize when it is time then to regenerate the entire forest. Now, your forester, you got to determine timber volumes. And so that's the next thing that they'll do after forester will, one, listen to you as far as what are your objectives of your woodlands. Hopefully you've got a management plan. That's different from the harvest plan. That's what we're doing now. But the forester is going to understand what your what your end game is, what your objectives are, and they're going to mark trees accordingly, according to both biological, but also to what's your game plan. So that's a stick there. Some of you folks might know what that guy is. So they'll use what they call a Biltmore stick. And to measure, first we got to get the diameter of the tree, and it's measured always 4.5 feet on the uphill side. And it works on geometry, but they can get the approximate diameter, usually to a 2 inch or even a 1 inch diameter class. And then they can, on the other side of that stick is called a merit hypsometer, where they can actually determine the number of merchantable logs that are in the tree up to, might be a crotch in the tree where it forks or whatever it might be, but they'll have, then you have your diameter and you have your length, your log lengths. And so be able to determine the volume. Trees to be harvested need to be visibly marked. So this is one you see there on the left. They'll usually put blue paint, a dot, up about, again, anywhere from 4.5 to 6 feet off the ground, because you want to be able to see, particularly as we're getting more mechanized harvesters out there, they're going to be sitting in a cab, they want to see it. And the other thing you'll see is, let me see if I've got that there. Yeah, that one marked there. You'll see a blue dot at 4.5 feet, but then you'll also see one at the base. That's how we know that that tree is one that is going to be harvested. If there's a stump out there that doesn't have that blue dot, then the forester needs to talk, and the landowner talk to the logger, because you'll have usually it's triple damages, the value of the tree, because they took something they weren't supposed to. At the far right, will could put an X on one. It's a cull tree. The logger, the landowner, forester wants to take them out, but might not have a value to the logger. It depends, but it's at their discretion. And then sometimes some of our foresters over here, they'll put just a vertical slash, a large vertical slash. It's kind of between a cull and a harvestable tree. There might be something in there, pallet or something of blocking material. But again, it's something that needs to come out of the forest. I challenge you, probably should have taken my drink as you look at that picture. If you can find the mark on the tree, maybe not. So it is right there. And this, some foresters are kind of stingy with the blue paint. I usually say no, you make that big blue dot or that slash, but make it visible. And we'll usually put it on both sides of the opposite side of the tree, because that, again, we don't know how the logger is going to approach. They'll go all the way to the back of the woods and then come back through. But you want to make sure that the trees are visibly marked. This is just one. This was a small diameter sale, so you can see lots of blue paint. We were doing something out there trying to look for trees that were, looking for small diameter trees. So you can see that one in the foreground. It has that dot, so we know that that was a tree that was to come out of the forest. The forester then he'll have a field tally, so he'll have there on the left the diameter, and then the species. And so we'll have a little dot tally. This is their scratches now. Some of the older foresters still old school with paper and pencil, but a lot of now it's all done with data loggers, but the same kind of principle. They're tallying everything up to figure out how many, how many board feet are going to be in this prospective sale. Foresters will also then go identify the potential wood products in those selected trees. So here, forester is sounding the tree. If it's hollow, it's going to sound like a bass drum. The more hollow it is, the more it's going to sound like that drum. And they'll go up. This is like for veneer, for stave. They're just wanting to see how, because we get a lot of our trees over here in Missouri. We've had a lot of grazing. We've had a lot of indiscriminate burning decades ago. So those trees are probably hollow. They might not show it being, swollen with a base or anything like that. So they're at least getting that and identifying potential wood products. And that's the key. The forester will just say, well, there's potential veneer, potential stave quality logs. But again, you'll see in a minute, it's really left up to the logger to make that call as he or she's placing a bid on that timber. So, what you have, now you determine what it's worth. And so a number of ways, everybody thinks they've got this. This was actually one, that was a veneer log. That was about an $8,000 log that was just south of town. But everybody thinks that's what they have. And this is usually what we have in the Ozarks. And not too far, maybe not too far off of what I'm dealing with out at the Scout Ranch over at the Lake of the Ozarks. But again, you'll want to determine once they have the trees marked, then we determine give a value to it. Now over in Illinois, if you Google Illinois timber prices, you'll pop up with this page here, and then you can do different things. You can filter by product, by species. We'll talk. So this one here, I selected stumpage. Mention what that is here in a sec, and I selected red oak, and then this screen will pop up. And I just put all quarters. In other words, so what you're seeing on the right are the stumpage prices for red oak from 2025 all the way down to 2018. So you can kind of see how it varies. And they'll have a low and a high. These were sales that were actually recorded, and then what the average was of the sale. Now, I don't care for this one as much as I like to see what we have like here in Missouri. Well, so here, so stumpage, like I say, red oak, and there you can go see what you have. So from 70 to, $700. But the average was $290, what they call 1,000 board feet. Everything is done in terms of 1,000 board feet. You can also get this timber price survey results. I know this is kind of maybe hard to see on the screen, but this is one for different quarters from 23 up to 25 by species. So you can see the different species and then those different vertical bars for the different years from 23 all to 25. So you can kind of see trend lines. They do have another way to look at this, an actual line. So you can kind of see, are things trending up or are they trending down? So you just don't have a snapshot. Now, and there you go, a little bit closer. I forgot I threw that in there just so you could see what I'm talking about. So here we go, black walnut. Yeah, always high. And now this was $1.60, you see over there, a board foot. So you just multiply by 1,000 to get 1,000 board feet. Now in Missouri, we have a similar type thing where we'll have the region, we'll have the product, we'll have a maximum price, an average minimum, and this will also give the volume of the sales that have been done and what the units are, whether it is in international or Doyle. I'm not going to go into that. It's just whatever is when in Rome, do as the Romans do. It tends to be in the Ozarks for our lower quality material. It's international. Our walnut, our white oak, are higher value. They tend to be in Doyle, and that can be for another topic of discussion. What I do like about the Missouri one is it gives us the number of reports for this quarter. And that's, I love data. And so if I've got something, if I've got maple there, that third one down in saw logs, and only have 3 timber sales that have been reported versus, black walnut saw logs at 16, I've got a little bit more, confidence in these numbers. So if, typical, say we have an 18-inch red oak, 16-foot log, it's got 140 board feet in it. If I looked at it here, I come down here and I see that if I just want to be the average price of $34.14 a thousand, so that particular tree would have about 47, dollars stumpage. And 10 trees, say if this was an intermediate thinning, you were doing some kind of intermediate harvest, you might take out 10 trees. So you can get some kind of idea what you would get for the value of those logs. And when I said stumpage, so that's the value of the tree, of the standing tree, on the stump. And that's the price that you'll receive. But like we say, factors are going to, so you look at that and you go, wow, it's even average or high, but there's factors that are going to influence the price of those standing trees. The species, is it post oak or is it black walnut? The relative size of the tree and the quality. Are we talking veneer or stave? Or are we talking pallets and railroad ties? The sale volume, the larger the sale, yep, you'll probably get more bids. Distance to the mill, site accessibility. How easy is it for them to get into the forest? And then once they're in, to maneuver around. What's the logging difficulty? Are you a lot of steep slopes? What are the marking conditions? Right now, this is probably not the best time for us to be doing something trying to do a sale, but we've got something else going on. We're setting up a demonstration forest, and so we're wanting to go ahead and get this going. Competition could be, two loggers or two buyers can come in, and one really needs to have the wood for a particular, to meet their bill, if you will, what the market is calling for them. And so, yeah, they might offer a higher price. Logging restrictions. The more restrictions or stipulations you place on your sale, that will drive down the price because the logger's going to have to maybe be doing things. This is over in addition, say, to putting in water bars or water diversion structures. If you're saying, I want all my tops slashed, dropped, so it's low to the ground as possible, well, it's going to take more time for them to do that. So yes, you could expect a lower bid. Distance to the mill, this is what our map looks like for supplying biomass into our biomass boiler on campus here at Mizzou. And those little jagged lines, that's all, bridge limits and that you have on road speeds and things of that nature. So they can look really kind of wonky. But it looks like a circle. This is in the Ozarks. This is down in the bread basket, the wood basket, just to your west of where Chris is at. And what we did is we took overlapping mills, their wood baskets, if you will, and just dropped them onto one another. So if you were sitting in that heart of that center there, you have a lot of small mills, you have a lot of large mills that can operate, maybe from that yellow ring. So there's could be a lot of competition that could help drive the bidding process. This is something to kind of look at. This is from 1999 to 2025. This is what's happening with our hardwood grade lumber, whether you're talking flooring or millwork or furniture. You can see the trend that you're seeing there. We're just not using as much wood in this country, whether it's being for replacements, laminate flooring or whatever it might be. Kind of overlay this so you can kind of take that same time frame. So we had 9/11, but then we had the big thing where there was 2008, the Great Recession. We then had the Chinese had a housing boom. Then we had the pandemic kind of came up. And then our latest one that we've had is, the tariffs and what's impacting. But the bottom line is we're just not, our markets have been severely depressed to the point where we're losing some of our smaller sawmills and our capacity. But that said, there is still competition. There are still markets. Step three, you're going to look and select your selling method. You can do this one of two ways. We can do sealed bids, or we can do a negotiated sale. Now, a sealed bid, that's where you're going to inform potential buyers, and usually you're going to give them 2 to 4 weeks to come out and inspect the timber. Each bidder is going to submit their bid. You reject all late bids. Bids are going to be open at a specific time and location, and then it's up to the seller. You can reject any and all bids, but then once happens, there's no negotiation once that bid is selected, and the unsuccessful bidders are notified. You don't, as a seller, you don't want to go back and say, well, logger A offered me this, and I know your bid was here. Do you want to go back and raise it? And that's not ethical, so you don't want to do that. But we're right here in this process. We're getting ready to release our bid notice and give a time for the loggers to let us know if they want to come out and look at it. Some of them, if they've been in the area logging other tracks, they know. So you might not get them to come out, but usually they will come out and take a look, particularly if it's got potential to have white oak stave or walnut lumber or veneer. That's the higher the value, yeah, they'll be coming out. So this is a couple examples. This is Boone County up where we're at. So this case we had, this was a couple of years ago, so these prices might look a little higher, but we had 77 acres. Here was 162,000 feet of lumber, and predominantly it was white oak and black walnut. The forester looked at this and they valued the sale at 75,000. They thought that's what the sale would bring. This particular one had 9 bids and from 78 to 34. And that's, if it's something of decent quality, average quality, you can get that kind of a spread. So, but this is again another value. It points to the value of having a forester help you or negotiate, advertise, manage the sale because they're going to be able to get you pretty good price. They know what's going on. Bolivar County, that's just west of Cape Girardeau. So this one here, a little bit less. So 38 acres, only 631 trees. Here's one, they did this on the international scale. You can see, you don't see any walnut in there or not a whole lot of white oak. So even though there's a lot of board footage out there, stumpage, Forrester still said, no, this is only going to be probably about 35,000. And in fact, they only got 3 bids. But again, you can see the range they have. And again, it just points to the value of getting a consulting forester or a service forester involved with administering your sale, marketing and administering it. Now, a negotiated sale, they can happen. It's a face-to-face talk with a single buyer. Buyer has no competition. Seller is usually uninformed. I mean, that's the one where you get I get lots of calls. Usually they'll start about October. Here they'll say, hey, yeah, logger's working down the road and he's offered me $10,000. So you can imagine somebody does that and all of a sudden you weren't thinking about your woods and somebody makes you that kind of an offer. It's easy, it's tempted to jump at that, but then you kind of go back and you go, you want to again be informed and know exactly what you're selling. However, sometimes the negotiated sale is the way to go if it's small volume. Loggers really need to have something in there where they can move and stay on that property for about a week, maybe 10 days, unless it's high value, or if it's poor quality. I had a sale in Wordak down around the Steelville, Rolla area. It was 300,000 feet, a lot, but it was so poor quality that no, we had only one logger that was at a mill and was willing to work with us. And so I went ahead and we took that because we wanted to improve the value of our woods. So and I've had some farmers. No, I've worked with Tom Brown, he's logged before. I'm comfortable with it. That's okay. You just don't, have buyer's remorse. Whenever I buy a car, it seems like I never quite, when I'm talking with one person, you want to make sure that that you're comfortable with it. So negotiated sale. Now you kind of go that way. Now, how do you want to get paid? So you can either do it lump sum, or you'll hear different terms. Some folks will call this a yield sale. Sometimes you'll hear them call it selling on scale or selling on shares. Those ones are kind of the same. We'll go through that here. So in a lump sum, it's a single payment. It's going to be before the harvest begins. The payment is based upon that estimated volume. Your forester has done the work, but it's estimated. So you're upfront with that. The advantages though of this, so all the risk is on the buyer. If the buyer comes out and thinks it's great quality and gives you a high price and he starts cutting into it and it's hollow, that's on him. He has bought the trees. Capital gains treatment is a little bit cleaner in this. But again, the disadvantage is you lose if your forester wasn't a good estimator. And so usually too on that, young foresters are just starting out. Foresters or loggers will kind of know uh, who's out there marking the sale, whether or not that's going to be their eyes weren't quite as big as they needed to be. But anyway, these are some of the advantages, disadvantage. The yield sale or selling on shares. So there is the seller is paid a percentage for the value of the trees cut or a certain amount for each unit of product sold. This is where, say, the logger, again, or selling on shares, where they'll take and they'll say, landowner gets 60% of the sale, the logger gets 40%, or 50-50. Now that works really well if the logger can merchandise and maybe taking those logs to the higher, to the higher market, take the stave logs to the stave mill, take the pallet logs to the pallet mill, and go that way. But again, there it requires someone somewhere determining the volume, and that's usually done at the gate at the sawmill, where they'll scale that, then they'll write the check, usually to both the logger and the landowner. That's usually how it's done. That's how you really want it done, to it. But you're there, you're being paid for what's actually harvested. And if the logger's good, the way they merchandise, you can get a higher price. The disadvantages, though, are it's the accurate tally can be difficult once those logs leave the property. You hope you're dealing with a scrupulous logger that's not going to keep a scale ticket back, or be in cahoots with the mill. So you kind of lose that, inventory, if you will. And here the seller does assume some risk when you do this. Now, we won't talk about that today, the IRS, but sometimes when you do it this way, it's a little bit, that's what I talked about, capital gains being a little bit messier sometimes. Contract logging, yeah, you could harvest, you harvest your trees or you pay a logger for harvesting services, and then you take the logs to the mill. This is where the IRS considers this ordinary income. And so you have no way to to claim capital gains. And capital gains, another topic for another day, but you want to do that because you can really reduce your tax liability, particularly on that first harvest after you've purchased a tract. Advertising the sale. So this and the next one is kind of when just setting up the timber contract. This is critical because you want to make sure everything that is in the sale, in the advertisement, in the bid solicitation, is going to be eventually in the contract. You don't want to do a bait and a switch for the logger. If you got restrictions, you want to make sure it's in the bid notification so the logger's aware of it. So it's usually, though, the forester will put in, will have your name and address, your telephone number, or if the forester's working it, have their telephone number, where it's located, a legal description, usually a map, description, how the trees are going to be marked. What type of bid? Is it going to be a lump sum, a sealed bid or negotiated sale? Will there be visitation times to inspect? When those bids are going to be open? Is a down payment required? Sometimes folks do that, 5-10% of the sale. Any harvesting restrictions, and a performance bond, a surety bond, or a letter of credit from the bank. That is just put in there for in case, say, the logger drops a tree on a fence line or heaven forbid, a power line, something of that nature. And so there's money put aside to help, pay for those damages. Liability insurance, you want to make sure that they have proof of insurance. Usually most logging crews in Missouri, if it's less than 5 people, which usually our logging crews are, they don't need workers' comp. Workers' comp is separate from the liability. The liability is if the log truck pulls out and nails somebody on the road. In this day and age, sue happy, they'll be going after the logger, they'll be going after the mill, they'll be going after you. So you want to make sure that that logger has liability insurance. And you have your right to reject any and all bids. Now, keep in mind, if you don't have really great material you're selling, or the markets are down and you reject all bids, you're probably going to sit on that timber for a year, maybe even 2. I've had some landowners, they reject all the bids, even though against the advice of the forester, and then they've come back in 6 months and say, well, let's put it back out there. The loggers are going to remember, and you'll usually get lower bids if you get any bids at all. So A lot here. So this is what something typical might look like as a solicitation. This is what we're getting ready to send out. Again, all that information in there kind of gives that breakdown of the timber, how it's marked, um, property access, property boundaries, property boundaries in this case were marked by old fences, what the payment's going to be, lump sum over there in that second panel. Usually, forest harvest there's a year window in there, might be more. If you have wet weather, if you have any restrictions, if you don't want to have folks out there during deer and turkey season, or in a case where we're at with the scout camp during our summer camp. So, and harvest plan, again, on a map, and then the bid instructions. Are they going to be sealed bids? Where do they need to be sent or emailed? And when they're going to be opened? So this is what this looks like. Here's a table, loggers, so it's by diameter, and then the lower table on the bottom is by volume, but all the species. This helps the logger kind of get an idea. Is he dealing with a lot of small trees, a lot of large trees, but then the map. And this is where the forester kind of said, okay, these are the places where we're going to be harvesting. Those stars were kind of where the landings would be, and those red lines would be the skid trails. Usually a skidder most of our operations more than a quarter mile, and then the skidder loses money, so they try to keep those skid trails, you know, to as short as possible. Now this is negotiated. I mean, this can be the logger can kind of come out here. You'll see in a minute that they might say, well, why did you put it here? I think it'll be better here because of the kind of equipment that I have or whatever it might be. But this, you're giving your potential bidders as much information as you can. And the bid form, so this is what the bidder will send into us, it'll be their contact information. Here in Missouri, we'll have they taken the professional timber harvester training, or are they a master logger, so that you can give credence to that. And then their bid, and they'll sign it, and then they'll submit it into the consulting forester. So in both Illinois and Missouri, we don't have mandatory state certification or cert licenses for logger, but training does typically happen through hands-on experience, safety standards, and voluntary professional programs. Over here, in Missouri, we've got the professional timber harvester training. That's a week-long series. Actually, it's spread over several weeks, but directional felling. So you actually put the trees down in a manner it's easy for the skidders to get out with doing minimal damage to the residual trees. And then the master logger, I know there's master loggers in Illinois. So that is kind of the platinum standard where they are audited and monitored by a third party. So where they have. Step six, preparing that contract. This is where we say we want the contract to mirror what's in the bid. So it's going to protect the interest of the seller and the buyer. It should reflect, like we say, the same elements. How conflicts are going to be resolved. If will you have an arbiter if you need to have. You might want to have it reviewed by a lawyer. Usually, most of our sales aren't that necessary, but you could think high value trees or something, or if you just peace of mind, you can have your legal counsel just look over it. All parties hopefully will be out there. So the landowner, the forester, and the logger, you're going to go out and visit. And again, this is where you say everybody kind of agrees where the landings will be, where the skid trails will be placed. And also if there's any special sites out there that the landowner here wants everybody to pay attention to that maybe he or she forgot, but again, get everybody on the same page. Um, and then supervising the harvest, this is a husband and wife operation. You want to go out, and it looks kind of, maybe this is too traditional, coffee and donuts. I say, you go out, maybe not the first day when they're moving equipment on or when they're just beginning, but definitely that second day. It doesn't hurt to go out. Your forester will go out and work and talk with them, but if you're in the area or you can go out, Get to know the logger, establish those lines of communication. It sends a subliminal message. I'll get that word out that, hey, this landowner, they're taking the time to come out, get to know me, but so there's going to be eyes on the forest besides the forester. So it just kind of helps again. And then if problems do happen, if something, you get a cowboy on the skidder, new guy out there, and they start skinning up some trees, if you have that relationship on the outset, it's much easier to hopefully then resolve any avoid conflict, just to nip it in the bud. Before the logger leaves the site, and usually we'll have in that contract, we'll say, hey, 5 days before you begin, or a couple days before you begin, let us know when you're going to start moving equipment on. And then also within that week or a couple of days, the logger should tell you when they're getting ready to move off, because before the logger leaves the site, you want to make sure any closed out provisions, water bars, um, you know, uh, the cutoffs and stumps that might be at the landing, have they been distributed back in the woods? Whatever it might be, it's easier while that equipment is on site. When it moves off site, even if that might be a good logger, it's going to be harder to get them back. So you want to have that again before the equipment leaves. And these are some of the problems you're going to have. I mean, this was, yeah, residual damage, the skidder tire there high up, or this one here. I really don't know. I do know how that one on the left happened. That was uh, it was a tree that they were cutting down next to it, and the it was a feller buncher, and so he grabbed a tree that was kind of too big for his machine, and so it was kind of just wildly flipping around, and he just snapped it off. Or you can see damage like that 16 feet up in the air sometimes. But again, residual damage, you don't want to have any hazards out there. And if that tree wasn't to be removed, it better to come on out now because if you don't have any value in that tree. Water bars, the one on the top there, that is an honest to God water bar that was put on by one of my and the property was a forester. I'm going, you let him put that in. I don't know. A couple of shovels of dirt and a log, and yep, we're good, as opposed to the one on the lower right. You can see that's where it's properly done. You got a little about a foot dip and about a foot rise, and then you can see the water coming off the skid trail, and you can see one further down the road. Usually those water bars rather, are put in about eye level. It's about where you can kind of figure the next one's going to be on a steep slope. And we want to practice good post-harvest forestry. It used to be before invasives came along, but we still have trees out there that maybe we need to remove again to let our good crop trees grow. We have some of the elms or whatever that might be, again, weeding the garden even more. We've gotten the commercial value out, but we might have some more, or we want to create some wildlife habitat or maintaining skid trails and roads in there. If the skid trails are done right, those can also be used for fire breaks for prescribed fire. Can be used for recreational trails, emergency access, number of things. So whether you hinge cut there for creating wildlife habitat, if you've got a field, or doing chainsaw girdling or the hack and squirt to remove the trees that might still need to come out. We do have some guides, and I think I gave these to Chris, but the selling timber, that covers basically everything that we did here in this talk. And we also have the basic elements of a timber sale contract. Kind of got that set up as, if you will, column A, column B, column C. In other words, some essentials that need to go in at the bare minimum. And then here's some additional things you might consider. And oh yeah, well, here's some others. But knowing as you add restrictions, that's going to affect the bid that you're going to get. But it's good to have, because and more today, loggers are accepting of these contracts because they realize it does protect them as much as it protects the landowner. Have two other ones out there. The timber tax website, the National Timber Tax, that's a really good place to go to get a lot of information. for managing your tax. And also we'll call determining basis. We'll mention that here in a sec. But the National Timber Tax, Tamara Cushing out of Florida, she is one of the ramrods on that. Really, really valuable resource to where you can get that online. This just kind of is our bare bones, kind of talking about things. Basis is important, and this is a whole other webinar. But because trees sold can be taxed as a capital gain if you meet certain conditions. And probably the one thing I'll point out there when I say certain conditions, there's really just one, and that is you have to, if you bought timber, if you bought that tract of land, you have to hold it for a year before you can cut timber and claim that capital gain. I had one landowner, worked with him on securing, he looked at three or four properties, and he picked this one, and he was going to go, and this was like the holidays, before the holidays, and he was planning to start getting a forester out there and marking it in January. So no, you got to hold it for a year. If you don't, then you can't claim capital gains. But costs associated with the sale may be deducted. So in other words, if you're an absentee landowner and your mileage to and from, if you're going to inspect the site, if you have to stay in a hotel, meals, those can all kind of come off the top. So in the capital basis, your capital basis in the timber, that's what I say, it can really reduce your tax liability. And basis, that's a whole, like I say, another topic. We can see if we get any related questions here, but there it is, just timbertax.org, and you can get a whole lot of information right there. Uh, like we say, the advantages of establishing and using that basis, it's great when you're selling the timber, after you've had that year, because that's standing capital that you're able to take off when you harvest. As time passes and that timber grows, uh, then that liability is on you. But all that standing timber beforehand, that is where you can, if you've harvested, you can take that off. And that where I've seen some cases, these sales, their tax liability has been reduced as much as 75%. It's just like stupid, insanely crazy. But or if heirs passing their timberlands or you passing your timberlands on, you can get what's called a stepped up basis. And so that can actually add to their lower their tax liabilities when it's time to harvest trees. And this guy here, this was over in Bollinger County. So you can see he was looking before we started. He's happy camper. This guy here has actually harvested this particular stand. I'm sure those trees are gone now. This has been about 20 years ago, but this was his second entry in. So he actually had a third entry. And it's a west facing slope, but it's a good quality site. So you can have multiple harvests over the life of that forest. It just doesn't have to be a one and done, if you will. So just kind of go back to help reduce your risk. You'll want to work with a forester. You wanted the trees to sell are marked. You'll want to have you market them effectively. That's what, again, all these steps are for where your forester's coming in. You're going to competitively bid unless it's really kind of a wonky sale. You're going to know how you're going to be paid using that contract, getting paid before the saw starts. And that's what we say, usually that lump sum, that's where we get the case where I say, once the logger pays you for the trees, those are his trees. And so, and you go from there. You stipulate the conditions for logging. You set expectations early on and you help monitor that sale. And hopefully you'll work with a licensed and bonded logger. And that logger has gone through training of some sort. My contact information, Chris will have that as well. You feel free to contact me anytime. And with that, I appreciate your time.